If you're going to paste the words "Move Over Mario" onto the cover of your PS1 platformer, you better hope your game delivers. For 1999's 40 Winks, however, that was a bold statement developers Eurocom could have really done without, as these days, whenever I hear the game mentioned, this quote always comes up, usually followed by a series of eye rolls and snorts. True to its dream-filled plot, 40 Winks is indeed a game of nightmares, but not the kind your brain conjures up as you sleep in your warm, fluffy bed. I'm talking about the type of nightmares that'll have you angrily tightening the grip on your controller in an effort not to launch it across the room. 40 Winks has got to be one of the most disappointing titles I've ever been excited to play and promptly let down by. Not once did I ever feel comfortable doing any of the platforming, fighting any of the bosses, or even collecting any of the items. Suffice to say, I had a fairly miserable time with this game. And before people tell me I need to get good, or that the game's supposed to be challenging, let's just get one thing clear. A challenge is having to memorize an enemy's attack patterns and timing in order to dodge its swings and get a chance to strike back.
Why you bully me?
Challenging is not finding your attacks only land some of the time because their hitbox is so temperamental. And sadly, this isn't the only issue 40 Winks suffers from. It's a shame because the story is really quite charming. Okay, it's nothing super special, but given I'm a sucker for anything of the dream variety, it appealed to me almost instantly. Siblings rough and tumble aren't in the mood for going to bed, and so their mother tells them the story of the Winks and Hoodwinks, creatures that bring dreams and nightmares respectively. Elsewhere, we meet the ever-so-cranky Nightcap and his accomplice Threadbare. Nightcap's gotten himself into a bit of a tiffy because he can hardly sleep. One would think the logical step would be to get rid of all those bloody clocks making such a racket, but no! Nightcap goes with the second option, kidnapping all the Winks in the land so nobody can have sweet dreams ever again. Because that's a much more sensible plan, isn't it? Now, the cinematics are really something else. It's not often you get to see a lesser-known title with cutscenes of this quality. Bear in mind, this is from a developer who was predominantly known for their Disney tie-ins like Hercules and Tarzan. You know, the sort of games that used scenes from the film in place of unique cinematics. So to see something like this is a real treat for the eyes. My only gripe would be, besides the first and last cinematic, they're never really used to further the plot. Most of the time we just see Nightcap abusing poor Threadbare for failing him yet again, which makes me wonder why Threadbare even puts up with this shit. Just leave, dude. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. Luckily, the voice acting does a lot to hide the game's slightly dark and cruel tones, bordering on the whimsical and downright silly at times.
Can't I just have a regular teddy arm? There's nothing wrong with these ones, Mr. Picky.
But perfectly in keeping with the game's dreamy, childlike nature. Sadly, it doesn't carry on throughout the main body of the game, where we go from solid voice acting to characters just mumbling and growling their lines, in the same vein as games like Okami.
Who the fuck are you?
Whilst it's not a deal breaker for me, it's jarring to go from full dialogue to random grunts or vice versa, sometimes in the same section of game. Now, when you start off, you do get the choice of which character you want to play as, and this will stick throughout the entire of 40 Winks, there's no way to change it. I chose Rough, but looking through YouTube videos, I kinda wish I hadn't, because nobody seems to want to play as poor Tumble. Not that it really matters, because they function in the exact same way, the only real difference is looks. Both characters can jump, punch, perform a long-range scream attack, slide kick, butt bounce, and there's even some swimming mechanics thrown in for good measure. These abilities can also be enhanced for a short time by using the power-up boxes scattered throughout the levels to don a new costume. There is some overlap, like how the Jester and Ninja can both jump high, or the Caveman and Superhero have powerful melee attacks, but overall each feels distinctive and enjoyable to use, helped further by the fact your basic scream attacks also get an exclusive look and function with each costume. So you start off in Rough and Tumble's house, and throughout their home you'll find locked doors which lead to a dream world. These dream worlds are split into 3 levels, a boss fight, and 1 race that can be accessed by hitting a wandering NPC in the area.
Try me, bitch.
Now the races? Oh my god! I only managed to win 1, and the second I got hopelessly lost in before I realised I had to dive into the water, by which point I was so far behind I didn't have a hope in hell of winning. And even when I didn't mess up, I only won by a hair, and that's on the first race and after using every speed up and cutting corners where I could. Remember, this is supposed to be a game for kiddies. So let's forget about that and talk about the bread and butter of the game, which is its normal levels. In terms of visual design, they're kind of hit and miss. Now, I love the graphics of this game. Everything is so bright and colourful and wacky that it perfectly plays into the dream theme of 40 Winks. But whilst some areas seem to have had a lot of effort and thought put into them, others gave me the impression concepts had run dry and the developers were forced to use whatever was left over in the ideas box. Take the Nightmare Realm for example. We have a haunted house level, a graveyard level, and a scary wood level. Not unheard of for a spooky theme, but each feels unique enough to stand out on its own. But then you have the castle realm with stony walls and floors, and more stony walls and floors, and you get the idea.
This needs to stop.
Well, hopefully at least the platforming makes up for the lackluster design.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
I'm going to be honest with my hatred for this game's mechanics. If Bubsy 3D didn't exist, this could actually be the worst platformer I've ever played. So far, I should say. Now, when I play these sorts of games, I usually have a grace period for learning the controls before I decide whether they're good or bad. 7.5 fecking hours it took me to finish 40 Winks, and not once did I ever feel comfortable controlling Rough here. I had so many issues making jumps, with some platforms feeling too high or too far to reach for Rough's squat stature, and even sticking landings was a 50-50, frequently ending with me audibly crying out "No!" as I watched him slowly slide off the edge of a platform. Couple that in with the atrocious camera that often forced me to make leaps of faith as I could do nothing to turn it round, and you can imagine how fed up I was only a few hours in. The combat ranges from nothing to write home about to downright infuriating, because not only did the developers decide every enemy needed a multitude of hit points to keep you mashing square until the end of days, but half of the time your attacks don't seem to actually make contact. This is particularly noticeable during boss fights, so let's talk a bit about those. Now, you'll always be facing off against Threadbare, usually riding a suitably themed animal or vehicle from the current dream world. I suppose it's fairly cute, but whilst his attacks are rather basic and easy to dodge, hitting him back is next to impossible.
You're joking.
With this in mind, you can imagine how close I was to completely losing my shit when I found out the key to beating the final boss was performing slide attacks. You need to do this 3 times in a row to stun him, and then hit him to take a hit point off his health. Oh, and he has 15 of them, meaning you have to hit him for a grand total of 60 times before you'll defeat him.
No!
So really, there's only one thing left to discuss in 40 Winks, the Collect-A-Thon. I don't think I've ever played a platformer that made collecting almost everything in the game mandatory. The only things that are purely optional are the Z's for health, the 1-ups that give extra lives when 10 are collected, and the moons that add scream charge. If you want to fight the final boss, however, you need to collect all 40 Winks. If you want to collect all the Winks, you'll need to find all 4 dream keys on every level to unlock the next hub world. And if you want to explore every nook and cranny of a level, you'll need to collect every cog you come across in order to unlock doors that block your path. What makes this worse is that these mandatory items are often hidden out of view, meaning unless you're paying attention, it's quite easy to miss them. For example, I realised to my horror that I left one of the space levels with only 3 dream keys.
Fuck!
I begrudgingly backtracked through 15 minutes of metal walls and neon lights, only to find the reason I missed the darn thing was because it was completely out of view of the camera. The only way you would see it is if you were already jumping around like a loon for no apparent reason. Even the cogs needed to access all parts of the level and open the final doors are a complete chore to track down. I lost count of how many times I came to the last door, only to find I'd missed 1 or 2 cogs, forcing me to backtrack yet again in the desperate hope of stumbling upon them. If the developers really wanted to have items that required the player's utmost attention to find, add an extra bonus item in for just that reason. Something that's not necessary to finish the game and is just thrown in for a bit of fun. And after all this, after you've suffered through lackluster level design, crappy controls, and unbearable bosses, the ending isn't even fecking worth it. You beat threadbare mech dude here and get one final glorious cinematic, which entails rough and tumble destroying that annoyingly loud clock so Nightcap can finally get a decent night's sleep. And then we get this slapstick routine with a freshly awakened Nightcap chasing a hoodwink around his room with a shoe. That's it. That's literally it. The credits then roll and I realise I've just wasted 7.5 hours of my life on a game I hardly enjoyed, for an ending that was barely worth the trouble. And the best of it all is there's not even a bonus to unlock.
It's time to stop. No, this is not okay.
Now, I know I've been extremely harsh with 40 Winks. I understand this is a childhood game for many of you, and I'm sorry I had no love for it. But besides the whimsical graphics, spectacular cinematics, and decent voice acting, there's really nothing I enjoyed about this game. The novelty of travelling through dreamlike worlds wore off as soon as I touched down in the underwater levels, realising I had to put up with those cumbersome swimming mechanics, and from then on the drive to explore just never really returned. The only thing that kept me playing till the end was seeing how the next level looked, and less than 5 minutes into each of those I was bored yet again. Now, if I had played this as a kid, I'm certain I would have fond memories of it, and like some of you, spout on about how underrated it was, or how challenging it could be at times. But looking through the eyes of an adult, all I see is an undeniably cute game with adorable graphics and quirky characters, but also a game that's sadly let down by a myriad of major problems. I'm sorry, Eurocom, but a Mario killer this is certainly not.